Good afternoon, ladies, and thank you for joining us in Far Above Rubies today. I'm so glad that each of you are here. We gained a lot of new members over the last couple of days, so I hope that you will dive in and participate with us. Your reading challenge for today is going to be 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 1 through 16. Now, Paul deals with some very down-to-earth, real, right where you live kind of topics in this passage. So I want you to go and read this passage thoroughly, digest it, marinate it, and let it marinate in your heart and let it sink in. Okay, I won't go over everything, but what I'm going to do is quickly touch on the points that he talks about. And again, this is right down to where we live, ladies. So if you're not prepared to hear some truths, then you may want to stop the video right now. Okay, and you can tune back in tomorrow. All right, Paul talks about 4 important topics and that concern every one of us. Every one of us fall into one of these categories that we need to hear from him, okay? Firstly, he tells both husbands and wives that our bodies are not our own, that we should, not that they're not our own, that we should give our spouse authority over our bodies. And in this day and age, women hear that and they go, I'm sorry, somebody else gets to have authority over my body? I don't think so. Instead of realizing that Paul says this to both the husband and the wife. He's not saying that a wife should be slave to a husband. He's saying that we should, as much as is humanly possible, yield to our spouse's desires and needs. And that's plain. And he says it even more plainly than I could, okay? I like the New Living Translation for this passage because it puts it in vernacular that's easy for us to understand. And with that in mind, the idea of the first few verses in this passage are, if you've got a headache every night of the week, ladies, then you need to reevaluate your marriage and your relationship with God and understand that if your husband is not being fulfilled in your marriage inside the beauty of the confines of marriage, that he will eventually go seek that fulfillment somewhere else. And you will be the cause of him falling. Okay, I'm going to let that sink in for a moment. You will be the cause of him falling if you refuse. I'm not saying you don't feel good one night. I'm saying if you refuse for lengths and long periods of time to fulfill your husband's needs and desires, he will find that fulfillment eventually in someone else because we're human. We all are. Moving on. Please read this. Please read this passage, okay? Moving on. Number 2. For all my single ladies out there, I know I have several single ladies that tune in on a regular basis. I've heard from you. You're wonderful. You're awesome. And that's what Paul says in this passage as well. If you are single, you are a rock star. He says, I wish everyone was single just as I am. He said, but not everybody has the gift and the ability to be single and to be strong and independent and not need marriage. He said, if you can't stay single, if you physically or mentally and spiritually need a mate, then go and find one. It's not wrong. But if you can stay strong and single and devote your heart and your attention to God at all times, then do that. He says if you're unmarried or if you're widowed, if you have the ability, stay married to God instead of finding a spouse. So he says you're a rock star. If you're a single lady in there, you can pat yourself on the back and say, I'm a rock star. I'm doing awesome. I have a special gift from God that allows me to be independent and solely serve him and dedicate my life to Jesus. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with getting married if that's what you need to do. And he says that. Thirdly, he talks to those who are married. He says, don't leave your spouse. He puts it pretty plainly. Don't leave your spouse. This is not about condemnation. This is not if you have already been divorced. This is not to bring shame to you. He says, don't leave your spouse. He says, and if you have left your spouse, then remain single or do your best to be reconciled to that spouse. This is not my opinion. This is not the first book of Aaron. This is 1 Corinthians. This comes from Paul. It comes from God, okay? This is God's opinion. Stay married. If you cannot stay married or if you've already left your spouse, try to stay single. Try to then devote your life and your heart and your service to the Lord, okay? Things can become convoluted, and I'm not being judgmental here. I'm talking from having talked with dear people that I know that their marriage has fallen apart and they're trying to put their life back together. It's hard. It's hard, and life can quickly become more convoluted than it needs to be. And so he's just pleading, Paul is pleading with us here to say, if you can make it work, make it work. Fight for your marriage, fight for relationship, fight for God to restore and heal and bring new life into your relationship if you can. And if you can't, do your best to stay single. Okay. Lastly, number 4, and this is a beautiful thought. I love this so much. I've taught this to our ladies in ladies Bible study, was this, that if you are a lady in this group and your spouse, your husband is not a believer, that you should stay with them and don't leave them just because they refuse to believe in Jesus. He says, did you know that the believing wife brings sanctity or purity into her marriage? And that he says, do you know that because of you, saved woman, Christian woman, that your husband could be saved? You hear my little guy waking up. I gotta wrap up quickly. Go and read 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 1 through 16. This is real stuff, practical living. Go read it. I encourage you to do so. If no one's told you lately, you are loved, you are cherished, you are valuable, so valuable that we need to know what the Bible says about these topics, okay? You have worth, and your worth is far above rubies. I'm going to go tend to that. I love you all. God bless you.